Welcome to the Happy Dog Podcast. This podcast is designed to bring you ideas and uplifting information to help you live a meaningful and fulfilled life with your dog from a holistic perspective. Now, let's explore the world of a happy dog. Welcome to another episode of the Happy Dog Podcast. I'm here with two special guests from the NomNomNow team. If you are unfamiliar with NomNomNow, they're an awesome pet health company, and they provide nutritious, fresh foods to dogs and cats all over the country. So the first I will introduce is Ryan Honaker. And Ryan is an expert in microbiome manipulation, infection therapeutics, and microbial community profiling. He has a Ph.D. from the University of Colorado at Denver and was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at Stanford University. And then I also have Dr. Aashish Jha, who is passionate about integrating data science and genomics to address pressing challenges in medicine and biology, including the gut microbiome and its effect on health. He received his BA in Molecular and Cellular Biology from UC Berkeley in 2007, a Ph.D. in human genetics from the University of Chicago in 2015, and completed his postdoctoral research at Stanford University. So, needless to say, we're going to talk about the microbiome and how it affects our pets, but also these are two incredibly smart guys. So, thank you both for being here.
Great, thank you for having us. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. So, let's just cut straight to it. What is the microbiome?
So the microbiome is the collection of microorganisms that live in any environment. So you can kind of think of it as sort of like a rainforest. There's a bunch of different species that all kind of cooperate together and are very complex and have a lot of web of interaction and interact with the larger, with each other as well. So the microbiome is kind of like that with a bunch of different microorganisms, predominantly bacteria, but also viruses and some yeast and a few other things as well. Microbiome can be in soil or on your skin, but the biggest microbiome in humans is the gut microbiomes.
So why are you testing the microbiome when it comes to pets?
So the microbiome has been linked to a huge array and continues to be linked to a wide variety of different health conditions. So kind of some things that make sense, like gastrointestinal issues, but really kind of systemic, holistic, broader health topics, things like anxiety or allergies, you name it. I mean, there's a wide variety, and this is really where the field is right now, is kind of really exploring all these wide variation of impact. But one of the major things that can drive it is actually food and nutrition, which makes sense, right? I mean, bugs eat what we eat, and so they respond kind of in kind. So the reason to test it is to get a snapshot of what is going on there, because there's such a broad array of health conditions that are linked to the composition and the function of your gut and your pet's gut microbiome. Taking a look at that kind of gives you a window into what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. And what are some of the things that we can see when we test the microbiome?
There are several features of the microbiome that we can investigate when somebody tests the microbiome. The first thing is we can assess what is the species composition looks like in any particular individual's gut. So to do that, we can straight up count the number of different bacteria that is present in an individual's gut. There is a range of species count in an average individuals, like a normal healthy individuals. If somebody is sick, the numbers may be very low. So for example, there are human conditions where people have infectious bacteria that colonizes the gut, and those bacteria get rid of all of the good bacteria in the gut, right? So the species number in these people that have these conditions can be very low. So low diversity in gut can be indicative of some sort of a disease condition in the host. Other thing that we can look at is what types of bacteria are present. Now, we can do this for viruses and other organisms, microorganisms as well, but we're practically focusing on bacteria because we understand the bacterial function better than all other life forms functions. So then the other question, the second thing we can look at is what is the composition, what types of species are present. One is the species count, the second one, what types of species are present. So in a normal individual, we might see a few thousand bacteria, different genera of different species of bacteria, thousands of them. So then we can see, are there any particular type of species that we know are common in individuals like pets. And we know that there are several phyla that are common in pets. We can look at those. And the most exciting thing is can we correlate the bacteria in the gut with the pet's health. So pet's health can be pet's weight, it can be pet's allergy status, it can be any phenotype, as Ryan mentioned. We can say, okay, we can compare a pet with allergy, without allergy, and see are there any particular bacteria that are overrepresented or are missing. So that gives us some avenues to address the gut health, which we hypothesize will address the pet's health as well.
Got it. And so you mentioned like allergies and, obesity and things like that. Are there other indicators that there's poor gut health?
Yes. So we, at least in humans, what we know is gut bacteria is significantly affected by diet. So if you look, so what people have done, including me, when I was at Stanford, when we looked at hunters and gatherers from different parts of the world, we found that because their diet is so rich in fibers and, I guess, organic products, produce, they tend to have very diverse gut bacteria. And when we compare them to normal healthy Americans, we find that the American gut is missing a significant number of the bacteria that are commonly found in hunter-gatherer gut, right? So, so the belief is that because in industrialized nations, people are missing many of the taxa that have been colonizing the human gut for a very long periods of time, we may already, even a healthy person may already be predisposed to some of the chronic diseases that is very common in the industrial world, like obesity or allergies, right? Can that also be true in dogs? So, for example, you and your listeners are very aware with the different diversity of dog food out there. Some kibble, some canned, some dried foods are out there, and there are a variety of companies that sell fresh food. So the question is, are there effects of diet on gut health, and by eating different types of diet product, if the pet's bacteria are changing in some negative way, it will be important for pet owners to know what sorts of changes are there and how it's affecting their gut.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question that we and microbiome in general are trying to answer, right? Is when we see, specific bacteria associated with obesity or allergy or anxiety or whatever the problem is, how much of that is a response to an underlying condition that shifts the microbiome, and how much is the microbiome inducing the health issue itself, or is it somewhere in the middle? And so this is kind of where the field is. There's some, and it's like everything else, it seems like it's kind of a blend. Like there's some pre-existing conditions that can drive microbial shifts, which can make, drive obesity. But then there are definitely certain groups of bugs that can themselves induce some of these conditions. And so it's a very, as you can imagine, it's a super complicated environment, and every person is different, and every diet is different, genetic background, individual microbiome is different. But there are trends that are emerging all the time, and these are exactly the type of trends that we're looking for. So then we can come up with, novel ways to diagnose or treat some of these conditions.
Yeah, definitely. It's super interesting. And so the fact that you guys are able to test for it essentially is really fascinating as well. what does that look like, when you submit a PET sample and get that information back?
Sure. So, when people order our kit, we ship it out. It's a microbiome collection kit. It has instructions, has a swab and some preservation vials where people take a small sample of their pet's fresh stool, kind of shake it up in this preservation solution, which stabilizes the DNA. We then extract the DNA from the sample, sequence the DNA, put all the pieces of the sequencing back together, and then we then generate a report based from that. And so that is something that Aashish has spent a lot of time kind of perfecting over the last little while, is taking this huge amount of data and putting it into this kind of easy to understand, easy to digest, excuse the pun, form for people, so that it shows the metrics that he was mentioning earlier. How many different bugs are there? What type of diversity are there? And then we further into the report dig into what some of these specific groups are, what we understand about their functions to date, and how that looks like compared to kind of an average looking microbiome, to see how similar or dissimilar they are. And then we are starting now to it's getting more and more exciting as we collect more and more data. We're now able to start making some recommendations for things you can do to then, correct any things that may not be 100% on in the microbiome. So some of them, as Ashish already mentioned, things like, diet with fiber or in various fibers, dietary rotation, probiotics, things like that are some of the things that we know that we can do to help improve microbiomes that may be, not as diverse as they could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so talk about the food aspect of it, because that's what a lot of listeners are definitely interested in, is, the food. And of course, I think the testing part is kind of the first step, but then, how does the food fit into all this?
So the food, as kind of a pet health company, we sort of view all of this as kind of a continuum, where diet and nutrition is something that, as pet owners, completely control for their animals. And so it's super important that they are making their best decision for those, right? And so we kind of view this as more of a kind of a holistic suite of products and ideas of things we can do. So you can, feed your pet a trustworthy diet that's designed by veterinary nutritionists based on sound food science. There's a lot of kind of interesting ideas out in the food and nutrition space, but nutrition is science. Food science is real science. And so, having a sound foundation for that, and then building that out into additional things, treats that are healthy, probiotics that are actually based on the literature and that are viable and functional, healthy treats, and microbiome testing. And then, this is kind of the beginning of this suite of products that we're working on developing. So, working on some things that we know are big issues that we know have direct ties and correlations to the microbiome, like things that we've mentioned a couple of times already, things like obesity and allergy, anxiety, some of these things that are definitely tied, and kind of tackling these from a holistic perspective of, start with a good diet that's sound, add on these additional things that kind of respond to the science and to the individuality of your pet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can you maybe just talk a little bit about the benefit, from what you've seen, the difference in fresh food versus more processed food, and how you've seen that affect the microbiome?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, at least in humans, there are several studies that have been published that show that eating whole grain and fiber foods impacts the gut microbiome. So maybe it's better for me to explain a little bit about why eating fiber and whole grain food is beneficial for the gut microbiome. What happens is in mammals, when we eat food, we cannot digest every single ingredient in our food, right? Our body doesn't have the ability to do that. So what happens is when these food pass the stomach and they get into large intestine, there are still components of the food that are intact, So then what the microbes can do is the microbes can actually take those intact food, particularly fiber and complex carbohydrates that make the fiber, and they can start digesting these food products, and they generate what we call metabolites. They generate bacterial products that then pass through the gut membrane, and it enters our circulatory system, and it affects everything. That is why gut bacteria are such an important component of health, because these bacterial particles can enter our system. It can affect the immune system. They can go even to brain, actually, and influence brain functions. So that's why they're so important. So when we start eating heavily processed food, the processed food are either completely lacking some of the ingredients that are present in natural diet, or they have very little amounts of it. So what happens is the bacteria that thrive on these nutrition components, they can't live in the stomach or in the gut anymore, not the stomach, but in the gut, right? So they die, so we lose them. So what happens is if they have any sort of beneficial functions in calming down the immune system, that function is now gone, right? So the body can then be the immune system can be very hyperactive, which may result in allergies. Similarly, there are mechanisms how these bacteria, absence of these bacteria, can contribute to obesity. But not more importantly, the other aspect is also that there are infectious bacteria around us all the time. So just having some bacteria, even if they don't influence allergy or obesity or anything, but just having them on the stomach surface prevents infectious bacteria from colonizing that particular area, right? So if we're losing these bacteria because there's no food for them and they die off, now all of a sudden, some infectious bacteria, when it gets to the gut, might say, oh, there's a nice little real estate for me. Let me go and camp here. And then it camps there and can cause, even infectious diseases down the road. So it is important that that we eat natural food as much as we can, foods that have fibers, and not processed very heavily.
Yeah.
And you asked the question that we know what response do we see to fresh diet. There have been a variety of in pets diet transition studies where you take dogs or cats that are on a specific diet and you switch them over to a different diet, and then you look at what happens to them. But this hasn't been done in fresh food yet. And so actually to plug ourselves here a little bit, we're actually about to launch our own diet transition study in the next few weeks, where we're enrolling pets who are new customers, taking some kind of baseline metrics, including microbiome, activity, health assessment stuff, and then transitioning them to our diet for a few weeks, and then resampling these pets to look at what beneficial changes are happening. So this is, again, something that we're super excited about, and should help to really answer this question, like what exactly are these benefits? What can we use? How can we improve the understanding in the field by looking at these transitions?
Yeah, definitely. That's super exciting. And it's so needed too, because, a lot of these claims about fresh food, it would be amazing if we had more like data behind it.
In addition to providing fresh food, what we also do as a pet health company is we encourage our customers to fill out a survey questionnaire. So we have a very detailed survey questionnaire. So having answers to those survey questionnaires from a lot of people will allow us to just look at what are the factors that are influencing any sort of pet health issues, right? So the most data we have right now is for obesity. And what we are actually finding, and we are preparing a manuscript for submission in a scientific journal at the moment, but what we're actually finding is compared to dogs that eat fresh food, dogs that eat kibble have higher chances of becoming obese. Right? So food, we already know. We can show with data from our customers that what kind of food the dogs eat can influence their health. We don't know exactly what the mechanism is. We're investigating that in the context of gut microbiome at the moment. But our hypothesis is that eating fresh food provides certain nutrients in the gut, as I alluded earlier, that allows gut to be healthy, and that prevents that reduces the chances of becoming overweight or obese in dogs.
Mm-hmm. And then preventing a whole slew of other issues, because obesity often leads to other issues. So
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So this is so much amazing information. But I have kind of a simpler question for you guys, I guess. What led you both to, working with pets?
First, or should I?
Oh, you go ahead.
So, it's an interesting question. So I was working in the human microbiome and infectious disease space for a long time before this.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about NomNomNow and kind of what they're doing and what they're thinking about. And there's as we've mentioned a bunch of times, nutrition is one of the main drivers of microbiome shifts. And one of the advantages we have with our customers is that we know exactly what they're eating. I mean, for the most part, sometimes they get away with a few scraps here and there, but because we are able to control that major driving variable, that enables the data that we get literally out of the back end of it be that much more clear for us. The other thing that's really interesting about the pet space is that, people are super excited and want to help. Like they're sending veterinary records, and there's all these things that people provide. They're willing. They want the best for their pet, and so they provide all kinds of information, which can be kind of difficult to get in the context of humans. And so, because of both of those things, the amount of work and research and exciting data that we're able to get just moves a lot faster. And that's really what, also, I believe in the company and what they're doing. Everything is science-based, sound research-based. It's a great product. So I believe in that part of it. But to me, really the exciting part is just the amount of progress where we will be able to make in this field in a lot faster time than because of some of these restrictions in the human space.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear that. There is so much passion behind it, which I can definitely attest to.
So for me, I have worked in the human microbiome for the last 4 years as a postdoctoral scholar at Stanford. So what I did was I would go to some traditional human societies in the Himalaya, because that's where I am from. I'm from the country of Nepal. And I went to Nepal and I collected samples from people that live a nomadic life, people that live, as farmers, agricultural life, and people that live in the urban areas. And we compared the microbiomes, and we found a drastic shift in microbes based on people's lifestyle. But one of the problems that I found was it's very hard to pinpoint a particular factor that causes shifts in microbiome in humans, because human diet is so heterogeneous. We don't do same things every day. Someday people will go party, drink alcohol, and then they won't drink alcohol for another 6 months or something. So it's very, very hard to pinpoint this is exactly the factor that's driving the microbiome shifts in humans. So in the case of dogs, it's actually super interesting because dogs have a relatively homogeneous lifestyle compared to humans, because they follow a routine. They eat the same food at least for at least weeks or months at a time. So that reduces a lot of noise associated with the microbiome data. So now what we can do by studying microbiome in dogs is that we can try to figure out we believe we have more statistical power to identify a particular factor that's causing shifts in the microbiome. And we are seeing that in our data as we are getting more samples, where we have more and more power to detect factors that are causing shifts in the gut microbiome. Another thing that is also super interesting is there are a lot of work in the human space that have shown that microbiome changes in the same individual over time, just because of age, just because of different stages of life. But to study how microbiome changes in humans over a lifetime will require my lifetime or more.
Yeah.
Right? Well, what we can do is, because dogs are mammals and dogs have historically shared, food and environment with humans for thousands of years, I personally believe that studying dog microbiomes can illuminate many aspects of how human microbiome may be affecting human health and diseases. So that is another perk for me to join this company, because I believe that by studying dogs, we will be able to make a lot of significant progress in the science of microbiome.
And at the end of the day, I mean, because we're part of this broader pet health company, we have the capability to, work on products and then be able to release them and start making a difference in pet health very quickly, right? We're not just in a company doing microbiome work or just in a nutrition company. Because we're kind of have this whole suite of ideas, we can, as we develop some of these ideas, we can test them internally, validate them, and then, release products to help making a difference in improving pet health.
Yeah, and what NomNomNow provides is an integrative framework where we provide, there are a lot of companies that will say, oh, we'll test your microbiome kit. Okay, you test a microbiome and you found something. What do you do about it? What is the actionable thing, right? They don't have it. Whereas in the NomNomNow, as a company, we have the ability to take the survey data to identify lifestyle factors of a dog. We have the ability through our microbiome kit to understand what's going on in the gut. And then we have a mechanism of providing food and other products that we can then employ to address some of the issues a particular dog may be having. So that's the direction we're going towards. What I like to believe is we're going towards the direction of personalized health and nutrition in dogs. And I think that is not that far away. I would say like in the next 5-6 years, we will be there.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And it's so needed. And I what I really respect about the company is that they have people like you two on board who are really driven by the science of it and wanting to see improvements in the lives of pets. So keep up the good work. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll tell our boss you said that.
And what I would like to tell your listeners is we have a much better group of people that are in our customer experience team. So, if you want to pick up a phone and call them, they will take care of all of your issues. These people are amazing.
Yeah. No, the company is great to work with, and I've really enjoyed, talking with Kevin and Cindy, and now you two. And it's why I feel comfortable feeding a few of my dogs the product. So thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and expertise in this. It's pretty amazing to hear about, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will be excited to hear about this. And I will link up the information for NomNomNow in the show notes, and that includes, website, Instagram, Facebook, all that good info. So thank you again to both of you for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure as well.
Perfect. And we will see you listeners on another episode next time.